I'll start out with a little bit about myself. My name is Blake Dinius. I work for the county, which means that you guys are all my boss. So if there's something you don't like, just let me know. My official title is Entomologist Educator. You can kind of think of me like the bug guy. This is a mouthful to me. Just think of me as, if you have a question about bugs, I had one woman wanted to know what to do against stink bugs today. I went and helped her out with that problem. I'm happy to help with anything, even if you know kids that want to go look at butterflies. I'm happy to lead a butterfly walk too. The other thing about myself is that I'm a naturally skeptical person. So everything in this presentation is completely composed of facts and information that I've personally checked myself. I've read all the studies. Everything in here is backed up by me. So if you've heard anything different, I'm happy to really elucidate why I put that particular bit of information in this presentation. When I got this job, I had a lot of people telling me, oh, I have a doctor, he told me to do this. Oh, this guy here, he told me to do this. That's not the way I see this. I see this as, if I'm going to put my stamp on it, it has to come from me. And that's exactly the way I put together this presentation. I also have a really terrible sense of humor. So if you guys don't get any jokes, that's not you, that's completely me. My fiance says I have a dad sense of humor. So get ready. It can be a rough ride for some of you.
Should we ask questions along the way, or should we wait to the end?
The presentation itself might take about 45 or 50 minutes, so the questions tend to slow things down. But if there's something burning and really pertinent to the information, then I'm happy to answer it. I try to cover everything to kind of avoid. Anyone who's anyone can really put something out on the internet and call it news and have it not really be checked or at all. But this particular story came out May 1st, and every major news media outlet that I saw, they published the same thing. They were saying things like, all diseases are on the rise. The CDC published the study that said, mosquitoes, ticks, and fleas on the rise. US not prepared to deal with this. And this really made me scratch my head, because nothing about this particular study really lined up. And I don't particularly blame the media or anything. That's what the study looks like. You would have to really take a very close look at this study to really tease apart the details on what's going on. In my opinion, I actually blame the CDC for publishing what I think is a junk study. So let's take a look at it. When you open up the study, this is a graph that you'll see in it. And it looks like these bars are kind of steadily rising, but the study starts in 2004 and it ends in 2016. And this is a really important piece of information, the fact that it ends in 2016. Because in 2016, we have this very large, tall bar here on the left. These are mosquito-borne diseases, but before that, they're not really that high. And the reason for that is that this was the first year that you had Zika reported. Now, there were cases of Zika before this, but they weren't reported. This was the first year that happened, and we saw this tremendous spike in the number of Zika cases. If you follow this data out to another year, in 2017, you will see this bar substantially drop down to where it was kind of around 2015. So the fact that they ended the study in 2016, it's padding their numbers, really. It's padding that data. Because there were 41,000 cases reported in the United States, but that included territories as well. And 37,000 cases of that 41 occurred in territories, places like Puerto Rico, not places like Massachusetts or in New England at all. The majority of these cases that happened outside of territories were in places like Texas and Florida and things like that, very close to the more tropical areas. But if you take out this large number of Zika cases, what you'll see is that mosquito-borne diseases aren't really rising at all. There are some years where they're worse than others, some years that are better, but from 2004 to 2016 have not changed that much. So to include that as a cause for concern, that the US is not prepared to deal with this, in my opinion, is not completely accurate whatsoever. On the other hand, you have ticks, and ticks are making up the bulk of all vector-borne diseases. And if you follow the numbers, so ticks are make up 82, around 80% of all of these. And if you pull out Zika, again, ticks make about 81% of all the diseases in 2016. And if you follow those numbers back even further, before 2004, you will see that tick-borne diseases have been rising, unlike the mosquito-borne diseases, unlike fleas. The ticks are really our primary concern. And just looking at some data collected from Mass Department of Public Health, this is what it would look like starting in 1990. And yeah, this is you see, like I said, some years are worse than others, but there's no doubt about it. In 2016, we are much worse off than we were in 1990. And the green represents Lyme. The blue bars down here represent a disease called babesiosis. A lot of people haven't heard about that as much. That's a disease that we find tends to be fairly localized, but Plymouth County happens to be one of the counties where we do see it. And then you have anaplasmosis. That's in the kind of burgundy, purple color. That one too is a disease that we tend to see in the Northeast. But those two diseases, those are almost unheard of, and now you can see them starting to grow too. We don't know. You can't really expect it. You can't really say for sure if it's going to continue the same way as Lyme disease, but it certainly looks like it based on this set of data. Only time will tell with this. The other thing that really tipped me off to what I think is that junk study that the CDC put out is that they said that there were only 30,000 cases of Lyme reported annually. We have 325 million people in the United States. And when I looked at that, I said, that doesn't add up. That doesn't look right. I mean, if you talk to people, they'll tell you. I mean, you've had Lyme disease 3 times in this 1 year. I know plenty of people that have Lyme disease. I know people's dogs that have had Lyme disease. Everyone either knows someone or has had it at some point in their life within this county. And so this number, I looked at that and I said, that's different than every number I've ever seen put out. And the CDC even admits that. They said that the number of cases of Lyme disease are estimated at 10 times that number. They said so in a different report they published earlier, yet they didn't think to include it in this particular study. They estimate, like I said, 300,000 cases. However, if you speak with doctors or physicians or researchers that have been looking at Lyme disease for a very long time, they will tell you that even this number could be an underestimation, that it may be as high as 500,000, maybe even 1 million cases. The bottom line is that 30,000 is a very gross underestimate of the number of cases that are actually occurring. And those cases, whether you look at it at 300,000, 1 million cases, those are all concentrated in 2 spots in America, Northeast and Upper Midwest. We do have cases as far north as Alaska, so we do see cases that far north where it's that cold, but the majority of cases happen to be right here at home and Upper Midwest. But between you and me, I think we're winning. And if you follow this data out, so this is a map of what Lyme disease every blue dot represents a case of what Lyme disease looked like in 2001. 14 years later, it just kind of fans out like that. Kind of stays in the same spot, but it is moving. It is spreading. And these spots here, where it was in 2001, have just gotten worse since then. So how bad is it here? Well, let's put some numbers on this. CDC calls anything with high incidence rate 10 and up. That's what they define high incidence. This is where they decide, oh, this is a problem, we need to start caring. In 2014, the US incidence rate was 7.9. So still not a problem, according to the CDC. Still not something that they need to be concerned about. And this, to me, is really upsetting because very often people will say, it's a problem here, what are people doing about it? How are people going to help us? And in this particular case, when it comes with tick-borne diseases, there is no one at the top that's looking down and saying there's a problem. It's all going to have to come from us. In 2014, what was going on in Massachusetts was that Massachusetts was experiencing an incidence rate of 54. So while the entire United States wasn't looking at this as being a problem, here in Massachusetts and really all of New England, we were seeing incidence rates that were well above this high incidence mark. They were 5 or 8 times as high. And again, this is all based on that 1/10 number. So in reality, we may have been looking at an incidence rate of 540. Or maybe in Maine, they were looking at an incidence rate close to 900. So that's very, very high. And these shift around a little bit. You'll see Rhode Island and Massachusetts are really close. Sometimes they're above, sometimes they're below. Maine and Vermont kind of flip-flop too. But they're all pretty darn high. They're all not places where this is an okay thing. But wait, there's more. So when you look at this data and you follow it from the nation at 7.9 down to the state at 54, and now we jump down to the county and all these shot up again. Plymouth County was at 109, so Plymouth County was double what the rest of the state was experiencing. And that's because there are places in Massachusetts that actually bring that average down. There are places lower than the 54. So Plymouth County has to bring that average up. We bring that average up because we have a lot more cases of Lyme disease. And you might wonder, what are some places that Lyme disease isn't as bad? Well, it's places like Western Mass, actually. Rural areas where they tend not to see Lyme disease cases as much as they may see in suburban areas, and also places like Boston where it's more urban. We tend to see Lyme disease actually the worst in our backyards, in suburban communities, not in areas where there's like a lot of farmland or it's very rural, and not in areas like cities as well. And so that's kind of a weird situation where you might think it would be on the extremes, but really it's in the middle. So Lyme disease, this is still the biggest disease, the number one threat that ticks have when it comes to tick-borne diseases. What's it caused by? It's not caused by too many coronas, or I certainly would have gotten it by now, especially back in college. More of a stout guy nowadays, but coronas, they were cheap and they were readily available back in college. So it's caused by a spirochete bacteria. And the scary thing I think about this bacteria is we're still learning more and more about this every single day. You know, how does it behave? How to treat it, how to detect it, all of these different things. It's almost, what I like to tell people is if you get this bacteria, that it's a really scary situation to be in, because you never want to be in a situation where people don't know everything about that. And that may never be the case with anything, but with this bacteria we're finding there's a lot that we don't know about it. But it's not just Lyme disease. Sometimes people get carried away and they're only concerned with that. We have 10 different diseases that we know of here in Massachusetts that you can get from ticks. The black-legged tick or deer tick, that can transmit 5 of these diseases. Babesiosis, like I mentioned before, and anaplasmosis, but 2 others, Powassan virus and relapsing fever, are 2 other diseases. The dog tick, American dog tick, or what I used to call the wood tick, that can transmit 2 diseases, Rocky Mountain spotted fever and tularemia. And the Lone Star tick, which, good news for you guys, has not been seen here in Plymouth County yet. I tried really hard looking for it, much to my misfortune, and I did not find it, but I guess that's a good thing for you guys. This can transmit 4 diseases. It can also transmit tularemia, but also something called stari, ehrlichiosis, and this alpha-gal allergy. So if you look at this, tularemia is really the only place that these diseases overlap, which means that if you have a tick on your body, it's good to know the species because it lets you know what diseases you're at risk for. If I was bit by this Lone Star tick, I know I'm only at risk for these 4 diseases. Likewise, if I'm bit by this wood tick or this American dog tick, only at risk for these 2 diseases. And that's really good information that helps you. And at the bottom here, alpha-gal allergy, I want to talk a little bit about that. So what's alpha-gal? Well, it's not a feminist superhero. It's actually the allergy to red meat. And it goes beyond just red meat. We also call it the mammalian meat allergy because and what other mammals do we consume? Well, that's deer if you're a hunter, but also pork, so bacon would be off the table, lamb, and it also extends to things that contain gelatin as well. So my favorite candy, gummy bears. Gummy bears would be off the table too. And also things like Jell-O and M&Ms with their candy-coated shell. Those all could possibly trigger an allergic reaction if you had this alpha-gal allergy. So you'd be really left with eating Swedish fish and, I don't know, tuna sandwiches. That's not really a good life. I don't know. Maybe some people like that, not me. So first we had this Lone Star tick that came up here. That was the thing I just mentioned with that alpha-gal allergy. Now it's kind of showing up on the news as this longhorn tick. So we really have nothing against Texas. This is just kind of one of the things that we coincidentally happen to name ticks. What is this longhorn tick? Well, this is not a native species of tick. This is an invasive species. We first discovered it in Hunterdon County, New Jersey in 2017. But we have seen this tick actually crop up before. It has been seen in Virginia, for instance, in 2010. They actually found old specimens that that were previously misidentified as different species of a tick, but this tick's been around here for a little while now, and it's in a bunch of different places. I want to talk a little bit about this because I've been noticing it in the news a lot. So we think it's been introduced about 3 times, and we think that because of the mitochondrial DNA testing, we find 3 lineages. This is a cold-tolerant species, and it can reproduce asexually. So, but each generation will take about a year. So I like to think of these kind of like strong, independent women. They don't need any men in their life whatsoever. But the good thing about these is that they're disease-free. All these ticks that we've found have been disease-free, which means your major threat is going to be blood loss. And that's the major threat with really any tick. People look at me, blood loss, and they think this tick might drain blood super fast. But if you were to leave a dog tick, a deer tick, and many other ticks, if you left a lot of those on a body, that would be a threat, is blood loss. Eventually they will drain enough blood to cause some damage. And we're talking about a very, very large number of ticks. For instance, if you were to go donate blood and you gave a pint of blood, that's about 450 mils. With a single tick, they'll consume about 10 mils max over the course of about a week. So you're looking at maybe 45 ticks left on a body just to you reach a pint of blood. You'd have to leave a lot of ticks to cause some serious damage. But that's the major con with this tick. That's the major threat, is just being neglectful and leaving too many ticks on something. And that could be a problem with sheep farmers or people with large animals, that they might not groom them readily very often. But when it comes to people, I can't imagine you leaving yourself with 45 ticks on your body for a full week. So why now? Why all the ticks now? We just had this question earlier about Lyme being a government conspiracy, about a scientist working on Plum Island. Ticks are not a government conspiracy, and there's a lot of data to back this up, but the 2 big ones are that ticks are about 200 million years old, maybe 400 million years old, maybe as old as horseshoe crabs. And Lyme disease itself is at least 20,000 years old, probably 60,000 years old. They trace the DNA back to the last glacial maximum. So this is a very old disease. It's been around here for a very long time. And ticks have been around here for even longer, and they've been passing around this disease since its existence. So what's causing this trend? Why the growing numbers? Are doctors more aware of it? Are there more cases being diagnosed? Because all those reported cases that you saw, that spike, that kind of incline, that could be due to, part of that might be due to awareness. Maybe doctors are it's all based on reported cases. So if a doctor can recognize it and find it, then they can report it, and then you get a case. So if doctors are better at their jobs, if they are recognizing this, you will see an increase in cases. And we think this is partially the reason why we're seeing this trend in the number of cases. However, we do think that ticks are getting worse too. We think that there are more of them, and we think that they're more infected as well. And we've seen this based on ticks that have been collected, that the infection rates are rising and that there are more ticks. Why are there more ticks? What are making the ticks worse? And the first thing everyone always wants to target is deer. And I think this has to do with the fact that, back in the 80s, there weren't as many deer. There really wasn't a concern about Lyme disease, and we've seen these 2 things go up at the same time. And the deer tick, it's called the deer tick. So I think people are doing their own kind of science in their head and their own logic, putting 2 and 2 together. A deer tick, and now we have deer, it must be the 2 things going together. Well, the current science and the current literature says that this might not be really the primary driving force behind infection rates and behind ticks. They tried removing deer from certain areas, and what they found is that it only works on islands and peninsulas. It's never once worked on mainland. So it's never worked in an area like Whitman, for instance, where you could shoot deer and reduce deer numbers and actually have a noticeable impact on the tick population. What they find actually is that there may be a certain threshold for which you have to reduce the deer down to see any impact whatsoever. So if you were to reduce deer 50% in a community, you would not see a 50% reduction in ticks. You'd see nothing at all. And then you reduce the deer more and more and more, and basically you get to a point where they're almost completely extinct, and then you would see a drop in tick numbers, but the ticks would never go down to 0. And that has to do with the fact that the deer tick, what many people call the deer tick, feeds on 125 different species of animal. Doesn't depend on the deer at all. It just kind of likes them. I like to think of my niece, my 2.5-year niece, as the mac and cheese girl. But if I take away mac and cheese, she's going to eat the broccoli, she's going to eat the mashed potatoes and the chicken. This is kind of how the deer tick is. It'll feed on many, many different kinds of things. It just kind of likes deer a lot. But you pull it away, and they're going to find other things to feed on. So overall, targeting deer, not too effective. Not great bang for your buck. But so what else is going on? We think that there might be other environmental factors going on that might be contributing towards this increase in Lyme disease, this increase in the number of ticks. And what is that? So as I mentioned earlier, we tend to see the infection rates, the number of ticks, all of these things be the worst in suburban communities and not in rural areas and not in urban areas. And we think it has to do with something called habitat fragmentation. And this is a picture that illustrates what that is. You've got a forest here, it's being chopped up and houses are being built in, and now you have a suburban community right here. And we kind of like that. Everyone kind of likes that. They like having that house built with trees around them. Maybe there's woods behind them that they can walk. Unfortunately, when these habitats become fragmented, what you tend to see is an increase in what we call competent reservoir hosts. So out of the 125 different species of animal that the tick feeds on, there are certain animals that are really good at harboring, they're almost like a typhoid mare. They're good at harboring disease and passing that on to other ticks and reinfecting ticks and keeping that cycle going. And we see increases in those animals as you split up the habitats, as you kind of break up that forest, you see an increase in. And certain examples of those are white-footed mice, but also things like chipmunks and also things like robins as well. So you see an increase in those animals as you break up habitat. And you see a decrease in predators of these animals. So red foxes, that's one of the big ones that tend to go away. And also things like bobcats, they kind of go away too. I've never seen a bobcat in my life. But what I know is that when you fragment habitat, bobcats are like the #1 thing to go away. I only ever seen bobcat footprints in places like the backwoods of Maine, for instance, or the White Mountains, never around Plymouth County. But if we had them, they'd be really good at controlling these guys. And then there's a third component. So the other two components, doctors diagnosing this condition more, or habitat fragmentation, what are we really going to do about that? We don't really have too much control over those things. But this third component, in my opinion, is the most important one, because it is the one that we're in complete control of. And this is, what are we doing to protect ourselves? So like I said, the CDC still doesn't think this is a problem. We can't stop habitat fragmentation, but we can do stuff to keep ourselves safe. And this is just a matter of getting education out there. It's a matter of teaching people. We've had these methods to keep ticks off our body, to stay safe, to prevent disease. All these methods have existed for decades. When I was looking at this, when I was doing my research on this, I was digging up really, really old papers on this stuff. Papers from 10, 20, maybe even 30 years ago on this. And this stuff has been around forever. And it's just people don't know about it yet. And there's a lot of misinformation that gets passed around too. So I'm going to talk a little about tick biology, and then I'm going to try to link that in with the protection methods to try to explain why we're using these particular protection methods. So ticks, they only feed 3 times max. The adult black-legged ticks, the adult deer ticks, they feed only twice in their entire life. And that means that each time they're looking to feed for a long time, because they need to get all of the food that they need to get from basically the baby stage to the teenager stage. It needs to come from one meal. The teenagers to the adults has to come from one meal. And then when the adults go to lay their eggs, it has to come from one meal. So they want to stay there for a long, long time. And that starts with attaching to our bodies with a physical attachment that will prevent removal. They're not going to feed like mosquitoes where they're looking for a quick bite and then flying off. They want to stay on us. And they don't want us to they want to get brushed off. So we'll talk a little bit about their mouth parts. So these are palps, these are sensory organs. You've got chelicerae, these are cutting organs. This is how the tick makes an incision into our skin and drives this fancy organ. This is the business end of a tick, the hypostome, into our bodies. And this organ here is coated in these backwards recurve facing barbs. And like I said, that's going to help dig into your skin and prevent removal. So it starts there. The next up, and this is my favorite part. Have you guys eaten dinner yet?
Yes.
Good. It's going to inject you with its spit. And this is what I like to think of as the perfect cocktail. So in addition to those barbs, you've got a cement that's going to coat the hypostome, fill in all those gaps and grooves, really, really prevent removal. Then it's going to, then the tick, it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't feed like a mosquito. It wants to create what we call a feeding lesion. It's a little bit like a wound underneath our skin. And in order to do that, it's going to secrete anticoagulants. Over the course of its long-term feeding, it doesn't want that wound to clot, so it needs to secrete something to prevent that. Vasodilators to promote blood flow to that site, again, because it wants that pool of blood, that feeding lesion, to stay readily supplied with blood that it needs to drink. And then pain reducers, because all that sounds like it's going to hurt, right? Immunosuppressive agents to even evade our immune system. So a lot of times people will tell me, they'll say, I had Lyme disease, I don't even remember being bit by a tick. Well, think of it like this. If you walk into your house and your TV is missing and you didn't see a thief, it's the same idea. That's a good thief. That's a thief that did its job. These ticks, they want to feed on our bodies without us ever even noticing. They want to be attached to us 4 to 5 days and then drop off, and and basically leave us with a gift, and we never even know it was there. That's the idea. That's what the ticks are trying to do. You find a tick and you catch it, that's a bad tick. That's a tick that failed to do all these things, failed to do what it was supposed to do. Bottoms up. So, like I said, it wants to feed for a long time, but it doesn't just spit once. It's not like it spits once and then it's good to go. It's going to keep drinking from this never-ending feeding lesion. It needs to keep spitting. So it's going to spit a little bit, and then it's going to suck, and then spit and suck, and spit and suck. And we'll do this over the course of 4 to 5 days, maybe up to a week. And if you don't like when someone does that to your drink, you really don't want a tick doing that to your body. This is how you get cooties. So the bottom line is that you can't get sick if you don't get bit. And so all of the protection methods are really designed around that. There are some things you can do if you do happen to get bit. There is a little bit of stuff left that you can do. It doesn't stop there. You can keep control over the situation if you take a set number of steps. But the best way to do it is just to prevent the ticks from biting you in the first place. So this is me. I really like fly fishing, so I'm out at the Deerfield River here. I'm out in tick habitat. Here I climbed Whitecap Mountain up in Maine, and so I do a lot of stuff outdoors. Some people say like, well, ticks, now I just keep myself locked inside all day. That's not what I want people to do. I want people to still go out and enjoy their lives, still do the things that they want to do, because there are ways that you can still do those things and not get bit by ticks. I've never had Lyme disease, and I do all this stuff very often, all the time. I love doing it. So how does it start? Well, first we'll talk a little bit about where you can find ticks. So ticks are small, and we don't like that about them, but that also means that they're very sensitive to drying out. This is going to be their greatest enemy, is drying out. If you brought a tick indoors in the wintertime and you plopped it on the ground, it wouldn't last 24 hours in your house. It dries out very, very rapidly. So you're not going to find ticks in places that are like the center of a soccer field. You will find them on the edges, or you can find them on the edges. Places that are shrubby brush, trees that kind of hang over, you'll tend to find them there. So you can keep your yard looking a lot like the center of a soccer field, and most people actually do this. You can relocate items away from those edges. And one thing that I've been telling people now is that as we move into the fall season, when the leaves start to fall, some people leave those leaves on the ground and then they try to clean them up in the springtime. What do you think happens when you go to rake those leaves and then you put your hands in the leaves, your bare hands, and you bring those leaves right up to your chest? You're just taking you're reaching your hands into basically ticks' homes, and you're bringing that home right up to your chest, right around your face. So it makes it more of a risk. But if you clean up those leaves now, before the ticks have an opportunity to get into those leaf piles, you're much better off. Tick tubes. Has anyone heard about these tick tubes? So these tick tubes, these are basically a toilet paper roll crammed full of cotton balls or lint. They contain a chemical that kills ticks, an acaricide. The idea behind these tubes is that white-footed mice, they have a propensity to hoard fluffy things, and they like to cuddle with it. They'll grab these cotton balls, they'll bring them down into their burrow, they'll roll around, and they'll kill all the ticks on their body, and then they'll come back up. The unfortunate thing about this, even though I think this is a very elegant solution to this problem, is that they don't work at all. There are these two scientists, really bright gentlemen that have been doing research for a very long time. One of them literally wrote the book on tick protection. There's a book out there, and he wrote it, Kirby Stafford. Him and Tom Daniels ran 2 studies. It spanned over multiple years. They were in multiple different multiple states, different locations in each state, and they came to the same conclusion that these tubes don't do anything, that they don't work to protect us at all. And this has to do, once again, with the fact that the ticks feed on 125 different species of animal. It's not just white-footed mice we're worried about. And not all mice behave this way. Not all mice hoard cotton balls, and they don't all share. So if you had 5 tubes on your property, that doesn't mean that they're all being equally treated with these cotton balls. It could just be one greedy mouse going out there, taking all the cotton balls, bringing it back to his burrow, and congratulations, you treated one mouse on your property, and that's it. So if you like using them, if it puts your mind at ease, you can go ahead, but I wouldn't waste your money and time on these, personally.
$180 for 18.
It's expensive. Yeah, they're expensive, and like I said, so it's almost like whenever I watch the Patriots, they win. But is it me? No. So if you want to do it, if it makes you feel better, go ahead. If you don't, I don't recommend wasting your money at all. Next up are these Select TCS bait boxes, and I haven't seen too much of this, but when I did see this, it really bothered me because this particular company trying to sell this wanted you to use this product, and they said, hey, look at our study, look at the study where it really worked. And they showed a study that came out of New Jersey, but they didn't show the study that came out of Connecticut. And in Connecticut, this product didn't work, and in New Jersey, it did. So they're kind of like cherry picking their studies, cherry picking what to back up this bait box with. And I think that this is not something that you should be spending your money and time on. These are really expensive, $500 to $1,500 per year to use these bait boxes. And when they worked in New Jersey, what they found is that the houses it was one contiguous stretch of houses. So it would be like you using it, your neighbor using it, their neighbor using it, and just this huge stretch of houses. And what they found is that these bait boxes may be able to, if you can treat a very large area, maybe they'll work. Like if every single house in Whitman had these, maybe it would work. But in Connecticut, they were basically just your house and then maybe a house down the street and then a house on another street, and that's where they found they didn't work. And so if you're just one person doing this and your neighbors aren't doing this, I tend to think that you might end up in a situation a lot closer to what happened in Connecticut where they didn't work at all. Perimeter yard spray, and this is kind of a personal choice. A lot of times people find this to be a very contentious topic. They say, I don't want to spray my yard, I don't want to do this. So it's your yard, you can do whatever you want with it. But what I will tell you is that if you are looking to do something in your yard, doing this the right way will work all the time, every single time you do it. Every single study I've ever seen on a yard spray has demonstrated that a perimeter yard spray with a synthetic compound done at the right time of the year will reduce ticks 97 to 100% year after year. So you can get very high reductions with this. If you use a synthetic, if you spray at the end of at the end of April, beginning of May, and then again at the beginning of June. Those are the 2 times you really want to spray. And in the right areas too. If someone's spraying the center of your yard and it looks like a soccer field, they're taking you for a ride. I hate to say it, But if you go outside, if you're someone like me that doesn't just stick to my yard, that likes to go hiking, likes to go camping, likes to do a bunch of different things outdoors, you can do a few things. You can stick to the areas away from ticks, like the center of paths, or you can wear proper protection in areas that you might find ticks. And this is really what I do. I wear the proper protection. I know I'm walking to areas that I'm going to encounter ticks, and therefore I basically bring my tools with me to defend myself against the ticks that I might encounter. So ticks, they're really lazy. They stay very low to the ground. They don't jump, fly, or climb trees. Remember, they dry out very quickly, so they need to be very close to a damp source, a source where they can rapidly recover the moisture that they may have lost. So how did you pick up that tick on the back of your head? It crawled all the way up there. I hate to say it. These ticks, they're sneaky buggers, and they'll actually dodge hairs all the way their way up. They won't bite the first place. They don't necessarily bite the first place they see. Sometimes they like to go to a spot and find a spot that looks tasty to them. I don't I don't really know why. But we can delay bites by covering skin. So that's one of the simplest and easy ways to do it. People say, you know, sneakers and socks, long pants. If you're raking leaves, gloves, it's just delaying those bites from happening. This isn't going to stop them completely. This really nerdy thing, tucking your pants into your socks. So I've been a nerd my entire life. I have no problem doing this. And the main reason I do this is because you have this nice gap between your ankle and your pants, and sometimes ticks get up underneath that when you're walking in the woods, and they crawl up to the back of your knee. Sometimes they don't stop there. Sometimes they keep going all the way to places that only your doctor should have access to. And the last thing that I want to do when I'm out camping with my buddies is think I have a tick somewhere where the sun don't shine and ask one of my buddies to remove it or check it out for me. That's not going to happen. I think I'm stuck with that tick until I get home. So this is why I do this. My friends make fun of me sometimes, but I don't care. I've never got Lyme disease, and I catch bigger fish than them, so I'll call it a win. What if you don't want to just delay bites? What if the physical barrier isn't enough? What if you don't like the idea of ticks crawling on your clothes and then having to deal with that particular tick after the fact? Well, we have this product on the market. It's called permethrin or permethrin, tomato. It doesn't matter as long as you use it. This product is something you apply to your clothing, and it will repel ticks, and it also kills them. And there's nothing else that we have available that will do this. But this stuff has been around for ages. It's been around since around the 1980s. And hunters have been using this for a while. The military's been using this. Works very, very well. It's cheap. It's effective, it's safe for pregnant and nursing mothers, infants, toddlers, and children. So I like to call this a no-brainer. It's something you can basically spray on your clothes, walk out into the woods, and enjoy protection for a very long time and know that you're getting a very high degree of that protection too. So what are the drawbacks? Because everything comes with a con, right? Drawbacks, only clothing and shoes. So if you like to wear shorts a lot or sandals, this is a product that you would only be able to apply to your sandals, for instance, or your shorts. You can never, it's not that it's going to hurt you if it gets on your skin, or it might cause some skin irritation, but it's just not going to work properly. This is a product that you need to essentially put on your clothes, let that set and dry, and let it bind to the threads in the fabric, rather than something that you can spray on your skin and let that work that way. So you need to apply it in advance. That's the other drawback, and wait for it to dry. On a day like this, it might take 3 or 4 hours to dry, so it could take a really long time. But the good news is that once you do all that work, it lasts 6 washings or 1 month. So this is something that if you're someone who plans ahead and has a routine, that you could really take advantage of this and keep ticks off your body very easily. For instance, I spray my clothes the first Tuesday of every month. That's the way I do it, because I know I'm not going to wash my clothes more than 6 times in a month, and so I use the 1 month mark. It's really around 42 days, so it's not like it expires at the stroke of midnight like Cinderella. All of a sudden you're not protected against ticks. You have some leeway behind that, but if you always do that first Tuesday, you know you're always catching it, and you're keeping up to date with your clothing. So what can we do to protect our skin? What can we do to keep ticks off our skin? What if we want to wear shorts, especially in the summer when it gets to be about 90 degrees or 100? We can use something what we call repellents. These are different from permethrin. And it starts with essentially stopping the way that ticks detect us. So this tick here, this is that deer tick, she's essentially blind. She's effectively blind, but she can smell where we are. She's going to pick up on things like changes in CO2. As we walk towards her, we're going to breathe, we're going to exhale, and she can sense that change in the level of CO2 as we start to approach her. If we sweat, she can detect things like the lactic acid in our sweat. Now I know ladies don't sweat, but for the gentlemen in the room, we all sweat, so this is something we'd have to be concerned about. And she can also detect things like body odor or tremors in the ground as we approach her. But we can block up the way that she detects us. She has these things called Haller's organs. It's like tick nose. And what the repellents do is that they essentially mix up those signals. They jam her ability to detect us, her ability to essentially smell us. So she might not even know we're there or know that we're something that she would be able to bite. The repellents that you have available to you, we call them EPA registered repellents. DEET, a lot of people don't like DEET these days, but you have 3 other options if you're someone who doesn't like DEET. You've got picaridin, oil of lemon eucalyptus, and this thing 3-N-butyl-N-acetyl-aminopropionic acid ethyl ester. Or you can call this IR3535 or you can call it Avon Skin So Soft with Bug Guard. So if you know an Avon representative, you can get this long fancy one down here. Otherwise, I use picaridin. I use it because it doesn't have a scent to it. DEET, I'm not scared of DEET. I'm not worried about it, but DEET has that funny smell to it, and picaridin doesn't, so I use picaridin. Oil of lemon eucalyptus, again, works really well, but the big difference with this one right here is you want about 30% oil of lemon eucalyptus. For the other three, you want about 20%. You don't need 100% or 30%. I see these things, some people, some companies market DEET as like 100% DEET or 70% DEET. You don't need that to prevent tick bites. You only need 20% and up. That's it. So I stick with the 25%. That's usually what I use. But all of those methods, the physical barriers, the chemical barriers, the treating your clothes, the repellents, they're not always 100%. So that's something to consider. So tick checks are really our safety net, and this is something that I do. So when I go out hiking or camping, I've never found a tick on my body, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. It's something that I always have to have the tick checks to rely on to back up my other protection methods. Because what we know is that even if a tick bites, the sooner you find it, the better. These germs, in the majority of cases, generally take a long time to transmit. We're talking about hours to transmit. So the quicker you find that tick and pull it off your body, it reduces your risk by a lot. So I do a tick check every single time you come in from the outside. Showers and going to the bathroom are two really good times to do it. When I told my friend that you could find ticks biting the family jewels, he started doing this. And he's like, Blake, I do this all the time now. I'm like, you don't have to do a whole thing every single time you go to the bathroom. I don't know if he just likes the view or what, but he just, I mean, whatever. He stays safe, so that's okay with me. What are you looking for? Ticks are super tiny. The nymph stage is about the size of a poppy seed. The adult stage is about the size of a sesame seed. So that's what you're looking for. Now the nymph stage is kind of starting to go away now, and what you'll find is the adult stage is going to be really out by the end of the month. You'll start seeing the adults, the end of September until about the end of April. So that's where we're looking for that, the sesame seed size tick. What do you do if you find a tick? Step one, you don't panic. You want to remove it properly, and that's with a handy set of pointy tweezers. Grasp it firmly, and then you pull straight up with slow and steady force. Don't twist, don't yank, don't jerk. It's just about gentle, steady pressure, and you'll get that tick off. Occasionally, this part here, that pointy business end, that hypostome, that'll break off in your skin sometimes. That's okay. The tick isn't going to continually transmit disease with just that hypostome in your body. At that point, it's a little bit like a splinter. So you would want to apply some antiseptic to that area, reduce any chance of secondary infection, and then your body will just work that hypostome up. If you try to dig that hypostome out, I mean, it's up to you, but it could hurt, it could cause some damage, and it's not a necessary thing in order to prevent tick-borne disease. What do you do after you remove the tick? So when I was a kid, I had dog ticks bite me sometimes, and I'd pull off the dog tick, I'd bring it to my dad, and he'd put it on his workbench. He was a carpenter, and he'd come over with his hammer, and he'd hit it, and he'd crush the tick. And to this day, I still think that's the most masculine way to kill a tick. However, I'm going to tell you to do the opposite. I want you to save that tick. So you want to bag it, and then you want to date it. And by date it, I mean you want to write the date on the bag. And why is this? So like I said, those diseases, going back to those 10 different diseases and how they're pretty much specific to the kind of tick that bites you, keeping it in a bag, that's the evidence. That's what lets you know, okay, this was that species of tick. That's documented proof. And then you have the date. So if you write the date that you were bit, and then if you start experiencing symptoms maybe 2-3 weeks down the road, now you have that date to go back to and say, I was bit 3 weeks ago and now I'm starting to feel kind of weird, or I was bit 2 weeks ago and now I'm feeling weird. It gives you that time frame. It establishes a story that now you can build on when adding facts to it. So not all hope is lost as soon as you get bit by a tick. There are still some things you can do. It starts with saving it and writing the date on the bag. What else can you do? You can get that tick tested, and this costs money generally for a fee, but they will tell you what's in that particular tick, what diseases are present in that tick, and that can be really helpful information. And I'll give you 2 good reasons why you should do this. But if you don't want to spend the money at the end of the day, if you're okay, you want to roll the dice, that's your call. So reason number one, this is an engorged black-legged tick or deer tick. This was attached to a 79-year-old woman. And this particular tick was infected with two things. Borrelia burgdorferi sensu lato, that's the agent that causes Lyme disease. It's a few different, it's a potentially few different types of Borrelia species, so they call it sensu lato in the broad sense. And this Babesia microti, this is the agent that causes babesiosis. And what's really significant about this particular tick report is that these two diseases are treated differently. They're often treated with different medication. And at her age, at 79 years old, she could die from an untreated case of babesiosis. So if she walked into the doctor's office with just a tick bite and that's it, that doctor may look for babesiosis, they may not. And like I said, if they don't treat this, this could land her in the hospital, or she might end up dying from it eventually. But if she had this tick report in hand when she went into that doctor's office, now she doesn't have to worry about that doctor not having this disease on their radar. She can show them and say, this tick had these two diseases in it. Doesn't mean that I have these, but why don't you take a look at it? You know, why don't you run some tests on this? Maybe I have this. Reason number two, what if that report comes back negative? So this was a case with a 2-year-old boy, and that tick, again, an engorged black-legged tick, this report came back negative. That's kind of nice to know that that boy, that this particular tick that bit that boy didn't have anything in it. Now, if that boy is expressing symptoms or something else, still go to the doctor. Don't just say, well, Blake told me that if this tick report came back with nothing, that meant my kid was safe. No, this is not intended for a medical diagnosis, but it might be a case where if it comes back negative, maybe you want to wait. Maybe you want to wait before putting the kid on antibiotics. Maybe that's a choice a doctor would make too. I don't know. After you remove the tick, again, antiseptic to that bite site can really help prevent secondary infection. And then I want you to take a selfie. And this is not so you can post it on Facebook and brag to all your friends, look, I was bit by a tick, look at this bite. It's actually to help you. It's again, have more balls in your court, have more evidence, have more power over the situation. I know this from fishing. This is where I got it, is from fishing. If I caught an 18-inch brook trout and I told you I caught it, you'd say, Pixar, it didn't happen, right? Same idea. If you were bit by a tick and you said, Doc, I have the bullseye rash, I had it, I swear I had it. That doctor doesn't know if you had the bullseye rash or not. They just have your word to go on. But if you have a picture of that on your camera, on your phone, then you can show that doctor, and now that doctor, you have evidence. Now that doctor can give you a medically qualified opinion of what they think that bite is. And it's also something that if you don't like that doctor's opinion, you can now bring to another doctor. And you don't have to worry about that bite changing on your skin or disappearing or anything. You can show them, look, I had this rash. And you can bring it to another, look, I had this rash. And that doctor doesn't have to rely on your word either. They can see it for themselves. What next? So does anyone here have any pets?
He walks the dog.
You have a dog? Okay, so there are many treatments for cats and dogs. My best advice is speak with a veterinarian on what product you should use. There's a lot of stuff. There's a collar, there's a topical treatment, there's something for cats. But the big thing is that the dose matters. So where it says large dog or small dog, that makes a big difference. You can also vaccinate your dogs against Lyme. And another example of why it's important to follow the packaging is that this particular product, even though this thing looks like a cat, will actually kill cats if you apply it to cats. That's because this contains 44% permethrin. So the stuff that you would spray on the outside of your clothes, 0.5%. This that you put on the top of a dog, 44%. So it's at a level that is much, much more concentrated, something that could really seriously harm a cat if you put it on the cat. So for cats, I'm a cat person. You want to keep cats away from wet pyrethroids. So that's the permethrin. That's if you get the yard spray, same idea. You want to keep cats away from that. But the big rule of thumb is that when it's dry, it's fine. So these pants are treated with that stuff. They're my anti-tick pants. This is my cat. She sits on my lap all the time. She licks her fur when she's on my lap. She bites the threads that are hanging off my pants. She's A-okay. The big thing is that those pants are dry. I said it takes about 3 to 4 hours to dry. What I would do is if I was hiking this weekend, I would spray my pants usually the first Tuesday of every month, but I'd let it dry overnight. And so you don't have to worry about anything at that point. It's hours. I mean, I know it's going to last a month. So I might as well let it dry overnight. And that's what I do with this particular product. Tick checks on pets too, especially in the winter. A lot of times people will let their dogs out in the winter, and what do dogs like to do? They like to run around in the woods, they like to jump in leaves and things like that. Then they come in and they lay in our beds, and ticks can come off in the bed. So tick checks are really important on our pets as well. The last thing I wanted to mention is that this is a problem that we need to be dealing with year-round. So ticks are well adapted to survive the cold. I even showed you that there are cases of Lyme disease happening as far up as Alaska. Ticks also produce glycerol in their bodies. Does anyone know what that is? It's antifreeze. So ticks produce antifreeze in their blood. And they have a 2-year life cycle. So they're adapted to survive New England winters. They're not going to go away. And to think that maybe last winter or this upcoming winter is something that these ticks can't handle, I think is naive to the extreme. They live for it. They're meant to live and survive these winters. And we see that with the number of cases that occur year-round. So you do have these spikes. So this is cases of Lyme disease from 2001 to 2016. And you do have spikes in the summer months. But you can see this never goes down to 0. And I was looking at data from one year where it was one particular winter, and we saw a spike in January and February. And it was right after we had a warm spell. There was one warm day in January, and then about 2 weeks after that, there was a spike in the number of Lyme disease cases because the ticks are going to be active anytime the temperatures get above 32 degrees. They get above freezing. You're going to have tick activity. So when should we be protecting ourselves? Year-round. And that's it. Bottom line, if we aren't protecting ourselves, who will? I mean, I don't think the CDC, I don't think they're going to be putting out a vaccine anytime soon. But we do have protection methods that are already in place. And using these will lead to happier and healthier life, and they do work. There is science to back that up. And with that, I'll take any questions.
I read an outdoor column every Sunday in the paper, and it relates to one of the comments was that they can't climb trees.
Yes.
And that's a popular way of shooting deer. They go up there and they climb the trees. And one I read last year, the guy came down with over 40 ticks on him from the tree. They go on a tree stand. So they do climb trees, huh?
So they don't particularly, here's the reason why they don't climb trees. And there could be a number of reasons why the guy had ticks up in that tree standing. For instance, I'll give you a good example of a hunter, for instance. There's this guy I spoke with, and him and his buddy would go hunting. And at the end of the day, when he was done hunting, he'd take his rifle, put it on the ground, sit underneath a tree, rest for a little while, maybe like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, take his rifle, pick it up, put the strap back on his shoulder, and he'd always have ticks on his head. And he said, where are they coming from? They've got to be falling out of trees. But then one day, he put down his rifle, and his buddy looked at his rifle, and the ticks were all over the rifle. And then he went, picked up that rifle, put that strap back up on his shoulder, and the ticks crawled up onto his neck. And so every time he had been doing this, but the ticks were never falling out of the tree, he was bringing them up to his head with his rifle strap unknowingly. So in that particular case, I mean, it could be people going up and down, bringing ticks up into that place, sitting down, could be a number of different reasons for that. But based on the tick's biology, one of the reasons why I don't think that that's possible is the fact that, like I said, the ticks, they dry out really, really fast. They need to, for a tick, in a tick's world, it's essentially look for food or drink water. And that's it, one or the other. And so when a tick is low to the ground, they want to be close to their water source, which is essentially a damp environment. They don't drink water like you and me. They secrete a crystal, they secrete a salt from their mouth, and that absorbs water from the environment. So the area has to be a very humid area. And we're talking about areas underneath leaves, if you've ever picked up leaves and they're wet underneath. Areas underneath leaves like that, underneath brush where it might be wet and damp. They'll be under there and they'll secrete that crystal, and that'll absorb water, and then they'll lap it back up. And as soon as they come away from that, they're hemorrhaging moisture. They're losing moisture very, very rapidly. So for a tick to climb all the way up a tree, it's losing moisture the entire way up, losing it, and then sitting in that tree waiting for someone while it's essentially dying. And if a person doesn't show up, then they have to crawl back down and then drink water. That doesn't seem like something that a tick would particularly do. Doesn't seem They wouldn't. The ticks aren't. They're not smart like that. It's not their typical behavior. Another thing that could be happening is that the ticks are somehow being brought up there. I'm not a hunter, so I don't know what these lookouts are. But if there's a place where rodents would be there, if it's a nice shady environment where people might be bringing up food as well and putting food down, and now rodents are there and rodents are bringing up ticks, that could definitely be a place where that could be a way that ticks are being brought up into that environment, staying there, and now contacting that human being.
How about squirrels?
It could be squirrels as well. It could be squirrels, chipmunks, robins might be doing it, veery grackle. A bunch of animals might be doing something like that, and if they bring it to a conducive area where the ticks are able to live, and then a hunter is now sitting right next to them, it's possible. It's possible. I think it's probably more likely that the hunter's bringing them up themselves, but the tick is not going to climb up on its own, is really the bottom line.
I read a study that Cape Elizabeth, Maine,
Mm-hmm.
has had such an increase in the tick population. They do a test where they run a sheet along the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and the numbers are staggering.
Then I do that as well. So it's like survey work. And so when I was looking for a Lone Star tick that I didn't find, what you really want is like felt. You don't want, if you use like a bed sheet, wouldn't work as well. You want like felt. And I stick it to I have like a wooden dowel that I attach it to, and I'll drag that through. And here in Plymouth County, I can go to some places in Plymouth County and find about 100, 200 ticks in about 5-10 minutes. I can find that many ticks that quickly with that sheet. So it's not, sometimes I saw this one report about a hiker who had 30 ticks on their body before a hike. If you walk in the right spots, you can, like I said, and you're wearing the right stuff, you can pick up 100 ticks in about 5 to 10 minutes. If you run into the right patch, really.
But there'd be no percentage in doing that for a net, a net worth of getting rid of them.
No. So the black-legged tick, the one female, she can lay about 2,000 to 3,000 eggs. And then for the Lone Star tick, she'll lay about 5,000 eggs. So even though I pick up, what is 100, it's like, when there's a single female will lay that many eggs. So this, bifenthrin, yep. And so that's the idea, is that the two applications, you're wiping out an entire generation of the ticks. And if you spray in certain spots, then you're going to really reduce your impact on everything else. There was a particular study run in Maine with bifenthrin and with the all naturals, and what they found is that depending on what you used, or regardless of what you used, there was no impact on things like bees and butterflies, and it made no, because if you're spraying in the right area, it's going to really not really impact things much at all.
What percentage of that would you use? So
this particular product, you would have to hire someone. You need a licensed pesticide applicator to actually spray this product. But it's something that it's the best thing that you'd be able to spray. There is one guy I know who sprays in this area, and he charges about $90 a spray. So you're looking at $180 to treat for the whole year. That's like the cost of I tell people that's the cost of Netflix. So, I mean, it seems it's not the cost that's really going to keep you from doing this. It's more whether or not you want something like this in your yard.
This has been very interesting.
It's very nice. I really appreciate it.
Where do you see your trajectory here? I mean,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys